try to prevent that outcome. Try to go out proactively with media and figure out some strategies to let them know that, you know, all hell's going to break loose, and we're going to hold them accountable. And I've written an email to you all today suggesting a sort of a peer review process, which I think could be effective, to say to the council, you know, we're going to be looking at exactly what variations are approved, which we think are unreasonable, and we're going to get peer review of town planners to kind of look at that. And if it's generally agreed that this is excessive, we're going to hold you accountable. How do we do that? Well, we have to use media to name and shame and maybe target the councillors. Because as I understand it, Jono, the process of deciding this stuff, there are town planners, but they report to councillors, designated councillors. So is it valid to say that those councillors ultimately will be responsible for the decision?
Yeah, they do have ultimate decision.
So therefore, we can identify those people, can we not? And we can target those people.
That's correct. Yeah.
And I don't know how many of them there will be, whether it goes to the whole council or whether there's a certain number of councillors who have responsibility for the town planning section. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I can talk you through all of that. Yeah.
But I would have thought, you know, we need to hold the council that's responsible. And because we're not going to have the resources to go and appeal. But I think we could make it quite clear that if there are decisions taken which are clearly in excess of the town planning standards and unreasonable, and we can get them peer reviewed by the likes of Phil Haywood, and there's people around who are good town planning people who will help us say, well, that's just totally outrageous. Let's identify the outrageous ones that should never have gone through. Okay, these exceptions were okay. And my background's peer review in hospitals, so I think it's a relatively straightforward process to identify exceptions which are unreasonable, and then to say, well, and then work on the media to say, you know, we will go out as a group saying these have been peer reviewed as unreasonable, and work out some wording and strategies that basically embarrass and hold those councillors to account. Now, that's a pretty. What do you think?
All right. Shall I? I'll. You can start the.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing before you do launch into that? Because in relation to the peer review thing, that we've launched a similar sort of campaign at the moment about the TLPI, but directed mainly to the state government.
Okay.
So we wrote a letter to the state government saying we think this is a bad idea, and it was signed by 20 people who are respected in the planning profession. And we're now getting those 20 people involved in LinkedIn campaign.
Excellent.
Well,
do you want to start this recording again, or for the people who?
It's recording now. I can edit it down, but it's recording. So I'm introducing Jono. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
We'll come back to that point. Yeah. But I want to get Jono's. Give him maximum time.
Okay, so you're local people online. I'm Jonathan Sriranganathan. So I was the city councillor for the West End Wollongabba area for 7 years, and now I'm running for Mayor of Brisbane for the Greens, and the council elections in March next year. I'll talk you through a little bit about the broader politics and urban planning framework that's operating in Southeast Queensland at the moment. Then I'll talk specifically about what our positions are as the Greens, and then I'll talk you through a little bit more in terms of strategy and the best approach in terms. So that there's going to be a bit of an information dump, but then maybe at the end you can pepper me with questions. So the first thing to understand, right, is that at a macro level, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party have made a strategic decision that they do not want to put too many new dwellings and too many new people into suburbia because it's politically toxic for them. The good urban planning principles would suggest we need to densify around train stations. We need middle suburban areas like, you know, whether it's like Nunda or Bayfield, where they need to densify a little bit. The inner city is already very dense. We have really high population densities. We don't have enough public green space. Schools are overcrowded, all of that. So an objective good urban planning would say, spread the density around, don't cram it all into one place. But the major parties have made a strategic decision that they want to just cram as many people as possible into one or two areas. Fortitude Valley is one of those. The West End Riverfront is another. And then there are a few other hotspots like Milton and Toowong. But they've made a political calculation that they're just going to sort of give up on these one or two areas and cram as many people into there, and rather than having that difficult battle about densifying middle suburbia. And the entire planning framework reflects that. So we have a city council neighborhood planning process where every few years they come through and they set the rules for what the height limits are and what the setbacks are. And that process is completely undemocratic. You can make your submissions, you can sign your petitions, but they're under no firm obligation to listen to residents at the time that those planning rules are set. And so like in this area, we have the South Brisbane Riverside neighbourhood plan brought in over a decade ago now. There were lots and lots of objections to that. You can read on Curriculum Futures website, they've got a detailed history of like, here are all the different objections residents made to this neighbourhood plan. They raised concerns about height and density and supporting infrastructure and green space. Those concerns were largely ignored. And that is reflective of the Liberal Party's approach of saying, we're just going to cram people into here and bugger the local objections. And the same thing happens in terms of the planning assessment framework. So that's the rules for what, that's the neighbourhood plans and the city plan sets the rules for heights. But the planning and assessment framework, which is defined by state government legislation, it also introduces this performance-based assessment. So there'll be a height limit that says 8 stories, but you can argue that your building has high performance outcomes and then you get approved for 15 stories. And that's kind of what West Village did as well, because this site had a height limit of 8 to 15 stories. And I think in the end got approved for 22 stories. And this site had a lot of exemptions in terms of setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. And I think from memory, there are about 700 or 800 submissions against this development. A lot of community protests, a lot of media coverage, a lot of pushback. And that resulted in some minor concessions, like we got a little bit more green space, some of the building setbacks were increased. So it resulted in slightly better outcomes, but probably one of the biggest campaigns against the development in Brisbane history. And the thing still got approved with some minor changes. It's important to understand that broader framework because what the political system, the planning legislation, the local city plan codes are all combining to do is to minimize the importance of resident input and to say, we don't care about a couple of hundred residents who are directly affected by this. We've got this bigger goal of densification and finding room for new housing. The broader problem they're navigating with is not so much immigration or overall population growth. The problem they have is a demographic shift where middle-class people are wanting more spare bedrooms. And there's no judgment on that. That's just the reality of what's happening. So previously houses that might have 3 or 4 bedrooms and might have housed 3 or 4 people. Now there's a 4-bedroom house that only has 1 or 2 people in it. And so that's creating this extra pressure where even without any population growth, there's more and more demand for housing capacity. And so they're trying to solve that by rapid densification in the inner city. And we see that with the Kurupa plan, which is proposing height limits of up to 90 stories on sites that were previously, it's floodplain. They shouldn't be building there at all, right? It's ridiculous. We all saw what happened in 2022. So that's kind of what's going on at the macro level. In terms of the Greens approach to city planning, our position is very much, we want to support medium density development in a wider range of areas. So rather than what I would describe as sort of hyper density in a few precincts, we want to spread that around. Importantly, though, it needs to be accompanied by sufficient investment in public transport, sufficient public green space, ensuring that there's adequate schooling capacity and all of that sort of stuff. And so we're starting to, you would have seen that we nominated the Eagle Farm racetrack as one potential site because it's a 42-hectare site and you could put a lot of people there and create parkland. But that's sort of our first starting principle is the inner city is actually already dense enough. And we need to be thinking about how we spread that density around a little bit more. More specifically, there's a few particular policy positions we're taking in the council election. The first is that rules in existing city plans need to be binding. So height limits, setbacks, open space minimums, site coverage maximums, those should all be binding rules.
Fantastic.
So we should be abolishing this idea of having, you've got your acceptable outcomes and then the performance outcomes. And the performance outcomes say you can basically do whatever you want as long as there's some green facade on it. So the Greens position is that all of those rules need to be binding. And some developers don't like that because they argue that they should have the flexibility to negotiate. And our position is actually, you can do a pretty good job under your existing height limit. You shouldn't need to push it closer to the edge or push it higher to get good design outcomes. We are also taking a policy to the election of saying that all new multi-res sites should have a minimum of 20% deep planting. And so deep planting is trees with their roots in the soil, not with like underground infrastructure or things above them. Currently, the minimum is 10%, and the Liberals have recently, under Greens pressure, agreed to increase it to 15%, but they don't treat it as binding. So it's all well and good to say, oh, developers need to have 10% trees, but if it's not binding, it's worthless. So the Greens position is that it should be a 20% minimum deep planting, and that it must be binding on all developers. And what that would do for sites like this one is that if they've got to set aside a fifth of the site for trees, then there's a better barrier buffer around the edge between the buildings that forces them to comply with setbacks, etc. We're also we've got a range of other rules around requirements for rainwater storage and capture, because we're concerned that the more concrete and intensification you have in an area, the more water that pushes onto neighbouring sites. We've got some sort of, I can send the policy documents around, but more detail around overshadowing and ensuring that there's no excessive light sunlight being blocked and all of that sort of stuff. So the Greens position departs quite significantly from both Labor and the Liberals, in that we start from the position that we shouldn't have to negotiate with developers for better outcomes. We should make good quality design mandatory. And if developers don't like it, that's okay, because someone else will build there. The narrative that we have from the property industry is that if you impose too many restrictions, that will make it unprofitable for us to build, and we won't build anything. The Greens' response is that actually, if it's unprofitable for some developers to build, then land values will fall, and eventually it will become commercially viable for someone to build something there. So we don't buy this argument that, oh, it's not profitable enough. The challenge we're getting to now, though, is that's the Greens' position, right? Right now, the Greens have one councillor out of 26. On the federal election results, we could be winning as many as 8 to 10 wards, and that would really shift the balance in the chamber. Currently, though, the Liberals hold 19 out of the 26 wards, and Labor holds 5. So it's theoretically possible that the Greens win a bunch of seats in March. Labor maybe holds onto their 5, or maybe even wins 1, and then the Liberals are knocked out of majority. Currently, though, the Liberal Party is very firmly behind this performance-based planning approach, and they are unapologetic about it. And anyone who says, oh, but you're building too close to the boundary, or you've gone over the height limit, their response is, you guys are being selfish. You are ignoring the fact that we need more housing. We have to build up in the city centre, otherwise we have to demolish koala habitat. They're constructing this false binary. They're saying it's either koalas and farmland, or you have to have 90 stories in Kurilpa. That's a false dichotomy, but they're insisting on that because they don't want to have that debate with existing suburbia about saying, hey, maybe we do need some townhouses and some 3-story apartments out at like Clayfield or wherever. So there's a what all that means strategically is that 80 submissions counts for nothing. As I said, with West Village, we had 700 submissions. We marched down Boundary Street, we blocked the road in peak hour. We had another protest where we blocked the driveway to West Village, and the construction trucks couldn't get in and out for a morning. It was highly controversial. It led to some outcomes. It led to Jackie Trad calling in the development. But it was a huge campaign. And I guess what I'm telling you is that it is worth doing all that stuff. It's worth getting people to write submissions. It is definitely worth trying to get some media coverage around this. You can try and embarrass the city councillors and the various Labor and Liberal politicians. That's all constructive. But my suggestion to you is that it may not be enough by itself. The leverage you have, of course, is there's a council election in March next year. And so the Liberals are more susceptible to pressure than they normally would be. And although this area has been held by the Greens for a long time, the Liberal Party still needs votes for the mayoral race. So it's kind of me versus Adrian Schrinner. And Adrian, even in West End, he needs to make sure he has enough Liberal votes to hold his seat. So it's not the case that they're just giving up on West End because it's a Greens held seat. They still need to win support here to hold on to the mayoralty. But what we've struggled with in West End for many years is that a lot of our community advocacy around sustainable development focuses a lot on the local. And we spend a lot of time saying to politicians, you need to listen to West End, you need to make sure that infrastructure is balanced and all of that sort of stuff. There's not enough political pressure on these decision makers who hold seats out in the suburbs. So the LNP councillor, Adam Allen, he's the chair of city planning. His electorate is Northgate Ward. Now, Northgate Ward has been safely held by the Liberals for a long time.
Mm.
He's a key decision maker as the chair of city planning. He ticks and flicks off on development approvals unless he decides he needs to take it to a decision of full council. So to answer your earlier question, Duncan, most development applications do not get voted on at a meeting of full council because there are dozens of DAs getting approved every week.
Yep.
So it's only on rare occasions that a DA comes to a meeting of full council for a vote.
Right.
Normally what happens is that the development assessment team looks at it. There's a delegate or like the development assessment manager will make a recommendation. For controversial ones where there's been a lot of submissions, they'll take it to Adam Allen and say, hey, we've had a few submissions against this one, but we want to approve it. Are you okay with this? And he'll say, yeah, I trust you, go for it, kind of thing. So what you need to do is to escalate this to a political issue where Adam Allen is nervous about losing his seat.
Yes.
But you also need to be targeting other key councillors who are worried about losing their seats. So some of those would include Fiona Cunningham, who's the councillor for Cooperoo Ward, and they're under a lot of pressure because of the Olympics. You've got Vicky Howard, who's the councillor for Central Ward. She's the chair of Lifestyle and Community Services, and she's also under pressure from the Greens. So you need to be pressuring these councillors and making them nervous about losing their seats over development. And I know it's a little bit crass to be like, oh, it's all about party politics. But what I'm trying to spell out for you is that over many years, the political parties have made a very clear decision that they are going to ignore local community objections. You can present the most detailed evidence-based objections. If you Google my submission against West Village, I, as the local councillor, put in like an 80-page detailed submission about height limits and setbacks and solar penetration and density levels and traffic impacts. I spent a lot of time writing about Mollison Street and how bad that driveway was going to be. We provided detailed traffic engineering advice saying the driveway was going to be a mess. They ignored all of that, and now we see the results. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is that evidence-based arguments alone are not going to win this for you.
Jonathan, can I just go back to this guy in Northgate?
Adam Allen.
Adam Allen. How fragile is his position?
He's under threat from the Greens.
What, like,
we need to win about 3,000 votes off him.
3,000 votes
to take the seat.
Okay, and is there like a period of time when DAs can't be done because of election rules, like is it free time?
Not really, no. They kind of just churn through them. I think there might be a period where, like a month before the election, they won't bring any DAs through to council for a vote, but the development assessment team still has delegated authority to approve developments. So what's also good to understand is that with controversial DAs, and if you get enough media commentary about this one, this might become controversial. They'll just delay the decision till after the election. They'll just say, oh yeah, we're looking into it. What you really need to push for is a decision to reject prior to the council election, and you need to get that commitment.
So
No, that's fine.
this is state or council?
Council. Yeah. The state government also has the power to call in a development. They use that very, very rarely.
They won't want to do that.
No, and I don't think they would do that for one this small, to be blunt. So like 100 units seems like a lot when you live right next door to it, but these guys are at the state level, they don't call in things unless they're 1,000.
Who's your candidate from Northgate?
Tiana Pennyhart. She's I think she previously worked as a lawyer. She's quite competent. She's running a hard, strong campaign. The Greens have started picking up a lot of votes in those areas because there's more and more renters out there. And so, but to come back to how West Enders approached advocacy in the past, what I think West Enders need to start doing is actually talking to residents in these other parts of the city. Like, for example, you could pay a town planner $1,000 to write a report that the development assessment team could ignore. Or you could spend $1,000 sending out letters to half of Northgate saying the Liberal Party is destroying our city. Please don't vote for them. And the latter action might actually have a bigger impact at this point in the political cycle. It's up to you to think strategically about.
That sounds good.
But I think historically West Enders have done a really good job to talking to other West Enders, and everyone in the peninsula is very concerned about unsustainable development. But as soon as you get outside the inner city, people don't care about the issue.
So do you have any knowledge of major developments going on in that area that he's representing, which would be concerned?
Touchstones. Yeah, there are a few, but they've been quite strategic, as I said, about basically they are a little more likely to reject developments out there so that they can just keep approving
There's
more.
not a big line one that we could say, if
No.
they approve this, that's what's gonna happen to you guys.
I mean, I think you can make that argument credibly,
Right.
and if you can tell that story and say, look, the height limit on this site was supposed to be 5 to 8 stories, and now they're getting 15. Even if there's not a specific site near people's homes, that's still a concern because people think height limits are binding, and as soon as you explain, no, actually, and it's mind blowing because I think we're very accustomed to assuming that the political system is somewhat responsive to resident concerns about this. And the way, Duncan, you've been talking, it's almost like you assumed that they're going to listen to you.
Yeah, I know.
Like, they're not, you're not electorally significant enough.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, like,
Discouraging.
yeah, I'm sorry to tell you hard
It's
truths.
good to know the hard truth. No, that's
Yeah.
great.
So in Denver recently, there was a high rise one similar to this, residents complained about traffic as well.
Do you remember which street that was? Which one that was?
No, it was on channel 7, so introduced, like, you're probably finding again, I'm sure it was on there saying, oh, I've decided to go up to preserve green space. Now, Carrilville was a green space. It became the 30-story plan, but he's the one who specifically introduced let's go as high as possible. So you can definitely publicly,
Yes, and Schrinner is definitely under pressure, and telling voters across the city don't vote for Schrinner because he's the one who's ultimately making this incredible and powerful message, but it has to reach outside our bubbles. We have to, as community, because I can go and talk to residents in Northgate and say, hey, you should vote Greens because we're better than the other guys. It actually has more impact when they're hearing from residents.
Yep.
And Channel 7 and current said we wanted to go to council. There was a graffiti on Wellington Street where they.
I saw that, yeah.
Two months blamed you.
Yeah, which is
like
yeah. But like, I think I've been involved in so many campaigns against unsustainable development projects, and consistently what happens is that they'll knock them back slightly on height, or they'll delay the project. Or there was one in, I think it was 108 Lambert Street in Kangaroo Point, and that was a campaign coming up just before an election, or it might have been Park Road on the edge of Kangaroo Point. There was one there that they announced they're going to reject it, and they rejected it before the election. And then just after the election, the developer put in new plans for a similar size building, and the council approved it. So what you're dealing with here is an administration that is strategic about upholding the interests of property developers, and you have to be strategic about recognizing that this is not a fair fight. This is not a democratic process, and you can present all the evidence you want and as many submissions as you want, and you can collect a petition with signatures from every single resident in West Village. And the council will probably say, well, look, West Village was zoned for a maximum of 8 to 15, and we approved this for 22. So, once this precedent, a building, a site that has 22-story high rises complain about a site that has 15 stories. That seems incredible.
We've also got another real issue, which is both Sekisui and Unison are seen as ethically responsible.
They are,
So we're already, and that's the reality. And so their reputation and their money and their funding, previous developments count for an awful lot.
Count for an awful lot with the current administration.
Exactly.
And that's like, rather than trying to negotiate with these guys, you've got to recognize that people have been trying to negotiate with them for years. They have to be replaced if you want to get a win on this. That's the reality of the situation.
So how long has this person been in the seat? A long time?
Adam Allen's held the seat for at least 8, 9, 10 years. I think.
Do you know him?
I met with him. I sat on the city planning committee with him. And he's I don't want to say anything negative about people I've worked with. Like I guess I found him a little hard to work with, but he is sensitive to reputational damage, and he likes to put out fires early. So if he feels like something's becoming a big thing, he'll look for an opportunity to neutralize it.
So what's our big thing here?
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, going by, I've had experience with other roads you wrote to the last little report about these little stuff that I was on the border.
I remember that.
Yeah. I got so sick of it. They literally no health and safety, nothing, just like breaches of all sorts of things. I had a what they tell the safety state person, so you just got to put up with the fumes.
Yeah.
Anything like that they tell me it's a council representative, I put with the email,
Yeah.
and it makes them nervous because they're not used to people's persistence as we.
Cool.
Because they try to scare you with defamation of sources, like not defamation, it's a violation of my rights.
Yeah.
So, and in that regard, I think I'm taking more of a ball and chart shot with the facts of my experience, so it's not defamation on the streets.
Yeah.
Like, for example, next to us, we had a developer there 2 years, illegal trespassing, illegal storage, damage to property. Said they didn't want to do all that stuff. The council construction management team, they members back in 2016, were still there. I recognise the names. They apparently now have moved those people out. So essentially, I included the ombudsman and just started showing the photos and just making direct statements to the Lord Mayor and the CEO and everyone in there. And it's been saying the Lord Mayor allows them to do this illegal activities because it was breaking the law. And when I did that, I got traction.
Interesting.
And before I sort of went directly to the throat, we wanted to know what was the facts, they didn't pay attention. They just like went fine. So this is what we really like.
Yes.
You know, it's really they will answer you generally and vaguely. They'll take months and months to and it says nothing.
Yeah.
It doesn't address the issues directly.
Yeah.
And it gives you all these quotes to legislation, which if I read into that supports me. What I'm saying, and so until and then the very next day I'll walk outside after they made their federal construction letter, I get threatened as I ask the trade to not trespass the property and threats with violence. I write it in an email, I tell them all the square words, and I send it back.
Yeah.
And then I've never seen traction so far since I've started doing that.
There you go.
So if we talk about the facts, it's not defamation. You can't be afraid of
Oh,
it.
truth.
It's true.
Like everyone's afraid of
Truth.
it.
No one is going to sue you for defamation. Developers will always make you nervous about that. And I remember quite a few residents got we have with West Village.
Yeah, they tried it, like,
But they're not going to sue you.
it's right administration here, they didn't want to get involved in.
Apparently, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that they're concerned about things.
I'm mindful of time.
Yes.
I just did want to say, I would suggest that with this site, the priority should really be on, we just want them to stick to the rules.
Yep, that's
There
it.
are some existing rules in place. All we're asking is that this developer plays by the rules that anyone else would have. If you're renovating the back deck of your house, or you're building granite flat, there are rules you have to comply with. Why the big developers get special treatment. That's the message that I think will connect with people across the city. I do have to go shortly. Do you have any other questions for me at this stage?
Okay.
That's one.
Yeah.
We're just looking for the next big thing. And you know, from the work we're doing on the TLPR, we think that is a big thing.
Yes.
To have politician imposed planning regimes.
Yes.
But this is one, but it can actually it is proposed to be used in 5 other places.
There's even less consultation than the neighborhood planning
Even
process.
less.
Yeah.
It's just politically imposed planning.
Yeah.
And that's a very much wider thing. There's no NIMBYism about that.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's something we can use.
Yeah, but I think so. I think the when you start to explain what a TLPI is and people start to get their heads around that, like, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
They can rezone an entire precinct to 90 stories with 4 weeks notice. Like, what?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
there's not even a formal submission process. Like they rezoned that whole precinct, and just as a political exercise, the deputy premier set up a survey, but there's no formal requirement for any public consultation on that. And that is genuinely a concern across the city.
And the minister said, we set up a survey, we got 1,400 submissions because we were concerned about it. And he's never told us what those submissions said.
No, we know they were all those.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the appearance of a legitimate consultation.
Yes.
It's with their overall decision that they're already prejudged.
Correct.
It's the appearance.
Any other questions?
I just see if anybody online got anything.
I guess yeah, like there are Liberal councillors who are nervous and vulnerable to pressure, and now it's a time to be talking to the residents in their electorate. You can write to Adam Allen directly, but he won't care too much about a couple of West End residents writing. What he will care about is, oh, my own constituents are starting to come have conversations with these.
So we need to take it then.
Yeah, because the city's strategy has been a divide and conquer thing, where residents only talk to their own elected rep, and residents in different parts of the city rarely share knowledge with each other.
That's right.
And so we need to build these communities and networks across the city. And obviously the Greens are doing that through our channels. And like, I'm filling in Tiana about this stuff, and we're all talking to each other as Greens candidates and Greens members. But that residents in those electorates need to be hearing about what's going on here. It's the same in Cooperoo, right? Cooperoo is right in the firing line of mega development in the Olympics. And Fiona Cunningham's really nervous about losing her seat. So, you know, let her drop a precinct in there saying we live in West End and the LNP is not listening to us. we're glad we've got a Greens council and a Greens state MP who do listen to us, but the Liberals are imposing this stuff without any consultation and push that message out into the city. I think that's the best way to get leverage.
With West Village one, I walk past every day, and every time I just record, and I get through close to 7 cars. Most cars don't stop; they go straight through.
Yeah.
I'm going to put about 300 clips. I'm going to put it into Riverboat. I'm going to put in grouping up to the ministers to the top.
Nice.
The police minister and say we need police to monitor this now because it was executed so badly.
Yeah.
Despite the feedback and all that, and just say look, all the people which will break the law. Is the evidence, and then,
Great.
and then if we can get media and that sort of thing, and then
We did get media coverage on this one, didn't we?
Channel 7 turned up, but it was a big news day, and our story didn't get shown.
Yeah, right.
There was some big disaster happened, and but they filmed everything, they recorded everything, but they just didn't.
You've just got to blockade the driveway. I hate to say it. That's
Well, thank you, Jono. That's
Well,
been
thanks.
really
I'm
helpful.
sorry, I can't say.
No, that's been really good.
Well, it's identified as being an issue even before it was constructed.
We called this back in
Yeah.
2016.
I know.
And they still want to.
Yeah.